Hey, welcome to Two Seals and a Walrus. I am Sean Webb. We are doing a special One Seal show today. With me on my right, Navy SEAL, sniper, medic, Ben Johnson in studio. And we're going to have a very serious talk today about something that's been in the news. And we're going to dig deep on this, and you're not going to want to miss it. So don't go away.
Two Seals and a Walrus.
And here we go. So today's topic is one that has been in the news. And, you know, when this came up in the news, we had discussed whether or not we wanted to address this topic. And the resounding answer was yes, that we wanted to definitely address this topic. And in this studio today, we have a person who was basically in the middle of this whirlwind and understands quite a bit of what's going on and what the Navy is facing connected with drug use in the United States Navy SEALs and potentially some other, discipline issues. So what I'd like to do to set the framing for the audience is to read a couple of these articles that they may not have been exposed to.
Sure, yeah.
And get us all on the same page of at least, what the background is, what we're talking about, so that we can then have a conversation moving forward to include your personal experience with drug testing in the military, with knowledge of use of recreational substances amongst the Navy Special Warfare teams, etc. So let me get to these articles real quick, and then we can continue our conversation.
I get text messages with articles all day, every day from people that want to talk about what I think about the SEAL team's issues and how I got out at just the right time. Like, lucky me. Yeah. So let's hear what articles crossed your path, and we'll talk about what it looks like.
So the headline that brought this to my attention was regarding a letter that was sent from a rear admiral in charge of Navy Special Warfare and his concern with drug use and potential discipline issues in the SEALs. So let me read this for you guys. The head of Naval Special Warfare Command reportedly sent a letter to commanders on July 25th proclaiming that we have a problem, quote unquote, while urging them to detail what issues they see and provide recommendations by August 7th on how to get the SEAL community off the skyline. Quote, I don't know yet if we have a culture problem, Rear Admiral Colin Green wrote in a letter to the command. I do know that we have a good order and discipline problem that must be addressed immediately. And by the way, I'm reading off of Task and Purpose website, which follows military stories. Green sent the letter amid a number of high-profile scandals involving SEALs. Among the issues that have come to light in recent years were the nearly dozen SEALs booted from the service after testing positive for drugs in 2018, as well as others being investigated or brought to trial on murder charges, as Navy Times reporter Jeff Z noted. More recently, the entirety of SEAL Team 7 Foxtrot Platoon was pulled out of Iraq last month amid allegations of a boozy 4th of July party and an allegation of sexual assault. And Navy Times revealed several members of SEAL Team 10 were using cocaine and other drugs regularly. And despite the acquittal of a former SEAL chief, Eddie Gallagher, on murder charges in early July, his court-martial revealed that members of his unit, SEAL Team 7 Alpha Platoon, constructed their own rooftop bar in Iraq and engaged in other alleged misconduct on deployment. There's another article, one from Business Insider. Before they were caught last year, several SEAL Team 10 Special Warfare operators snorted cocaine or spiked their booze with a banned substance, often defeating military drug tests that they termed, quote, a joke. The Little Creek, Virginia-based command conducted urinalysis testing on April 9th and April 16th, nabbing 6 SEALs for allegedly abusing cocaine and other banned substances. Several SEALs told investigators they previously beat the testing program by swapping out tainted urine for clean samples, but they weren't screened very often anyway. Quote, I never once got piss tested on deployment or on the road where I was using most often, one busted SEAL said in a statement. When I was in Buenaventura, Colombia, I was using cocaine. I think I was the only one of the 4 SEAL Team 10 guys using cocaine there. It was everywhere, end quote. The 6th SEAL, Special Warfare Operator, First Class Daniel Boggs, confirmed Navy Times that he tested positive and lost his trident, but records provided by Boggs show an administrative board later cleared him of any wrongdoing. Boggs, 34, said he was given the option of remaining in the Navy with a different rating, but he plans on exiting the service. I mean, what do you do after you're a SEAL, right? You don't go be a bosun's mate. He insisted that...
Well, it depends on how bad you really want to be in the Navy.
I guess that's true.
I don't know many SEALs that want to be in the Navy all that bad.
Right. In the wake of the probe, SEAL Team 10 superiors at Naval Special Warfare Group 2 updated the urinalysis program, retrained those who administer the test, and hiked the frequency of the screening, spokeswoman Lawrence said. We now test our operators and combat support personnel while in garrison, TDY, for training and when deployed, she said. Okay, so there's a lot more to this article. You can look it up on Business Insider if you're interested in reading more of the details. But I wanted to set the groundwork for our discussion today because in the studio today, we have a former Navy SEAL.
Correct.
And you went through quite a bit of training, who was separated from the military. Involuntarily, right? For... popping positive on multiple drug screenings.
Along with a very, very, very inarguable lapse of judgment on my part and some cascading failure decisions that followed in suit. Like,
right.
if there's a graceful way to handle shit hitting the fan, I did whatever the opposite of graceful is. And,
but the simple facts are that you were a Navy SEAL, you operated out of Team 8 as a sister company with Doug, and you exercised your decision to engage in...
whatever I deemed fit for my life, which is incongruent with a lot of policy.
Right. So you used recreational drugs, fact... or fiction.
Fact,
okay.
Yeah, for sure.
You circumvented a number of urinalyses throughout your time in the service. Fact or fiction?
Fact.
You were able to help...
Not that it took all that much effort to begin with, but yeah.
Right. You were able to counsel other guys on maybe how they might be able to do the same. You did pop positive twice on 2 different urinalyses. Fact or fiction?
Fact.
But you also, because of this problem being more widespread than is, probably publicly known, you received a...
Certainly more widespread than should be publicly known.
Certainly. And you received an honorable discharge. Correct. With benefits.
Mm-hmm.
But you have a knowledge of this problem from being in the middle of it.
Yeah, probably an unprecedented perspective on it.
Right.
I think it's fair to just go ahead and preemptive address the fact that I'm going to say a lot of stuff and probably given the backdrop that we just played out, there's going to be quite a few folks that are displeased with my position in life right now, given what they just heard.
Yeah.
But hear me out.
So they're not going to be pleased with the fact that you pop positive?
Probably a lot of people aren't going to be pleased with the fact that it seems like I got away with it. If you got away with it.
Right.
If you could say such a thing.
Right.
It's going to seem like I maybe don't take the program or the community as seriously as I probably should have, but it's just straight up not true. That'd be an opinion somebody else makes.
Right.
And people are probably going to be concerned about their own, like anybody that's been wrapped up in this scandal or whatever you want to call it, or people that have gotten undesirable in-state out of their circumstances.
Right.
Probably not, going to be a little bit nonplussed about the fact that, I'm in a relatively decent place considering the implications of the stuff that I was accused of or guilty of,
I'm glad you said that because there are probably going to be a lot of people who are upset at us even having this discussion. Although, we're pro-military, we're pro-veteran, we give to veterans charities out of the revenue of this show. we just wanted to discuss the reality of the situation and discuss the potential causes or the potential intricacies that other people may not think about from having you with this unique perspective. And, one of the things that started this conversation that we wanted to have was, you take a number of individuals and you put them into military service, and then you put them through specialized training where they are then conditioned to break every rule in the book, regardless of where they are on the globe. And then you expect them to follow every regulation to the letter.
We are rule breakers.
Yeah.
By trade.
Yeah.
But we're also innovative problem solvers and professionals by reputation. And if we're going to look at this as a dual reputation and operational capacity assessment, you have to look at both in the frame. Otherwise, you run the risk of a polluted perspective.
Well, could there be a culture challenge there in that the U.S. Navy Special Warfare community gives you training to break every rule in existence, no matter where you are on the planet?
That's a convenient excuse, and I'm not. I can't say that I'm not guilty of resorting to that as a quick cop out in a debate with strangers.
Yeah.
But the reality is that's not that doesn't excuse illegal practices. Period.
Okay.
You can't say that because I was trained to shoot a weapon and because all of my training shooting a weapon was a human-shaped silhouette that I'm excused from murder because I'm used to pulling a trigger at what looks like a human head.
Okay.
It's not appropriate. We're trained to be capable of exercising extreme force under extreme circumstances,
Right.
with meticulous restraint. And I think that's where the translation gets muddled, because restraint is a very fickle beast in an environment that's so high stress, and it doesn't leave a lot of room for sound decision making all the time.
Right.
And it's not, there's not a place for it to flourish. But
So let me ask you this question. You yourself used controlled substances in your off time,
right,
in the U.S. military
correct,
during it as a SEAL.
yeah.
And so let's just take a quick walk.
Prior to signing my enlistment, in March 2007, when I enlisted in the Navy, I had not smoked a cigarette, drank alcohol. I had tried legitimately nothing. Never been exposed to mind-altering substance.
Super clean.
Yeah.
Okay.
So all of my drug experience was in the Navy, which does not sound great.
Right. It's right. The optics of that are not great for naval special warfare. But at the same time, here's the thing: is being trained as an elite operator that is under a highly stressful situation during deployments. Then during your off time, you have the opportunity to relax and do human things, relieve pressure, so to speak.
Well, I think so that's a good point right there. I'm going to cut you off real quick.
Okay.
Relieving pressure was not a factor in the equation for my decision making.
Okay. Tell me what was.
I'm not saying it's not for anyone. I'm not saying it's not for everyone. I'm just saying for me specifically, I was never reaching out to numb myself or escape or anything of the sort with these substances. I was very much engaging in a exploratory capacity, and I was methodical with it. And honestly, as far as they're concerned, it was of no consequence to anyone. The most damning thing I probably ever did in regards to their perspective of their operational capacity was offer people information to give them an opportunity to do the same.
Right. And so when people came to you because of your experience with substances and because of your experience, your knowledge of physiology, they were asking you what to do, what not to do,
Right.
what to mix.
Nobody came to me. It was like I wasn't like a pusher. I didn't sell drugs. Or I didn't have access to stuff like that. Or I wasn't sitting around trying to convince people that come get fucked up or get high or whatever. I was a seemingly reasonable source of information to mitigate harm.
Right.
People do stuff or are interested in doing stuff, and there's only so much you could do to stifle that behavior or take a firm stance against it, which personally I don't believe in, so that's why I didn't. I enabled them, and I enabled them in the most harmless way I saw fit, which is give them accurate information on the physiological responses, give them as accurate of a forecast as I could possibly produce for them if they were to engage in stuff, in relation to potential training or whatever kind of thing we had going on at the time. And then without too much unsolicited advice, I tried to advise on more appropriate times and places and circumstances to do these things. And maybe it helped some, maybe it didn't. I certainly have never heard of any instance where anything that I gave or helped facilitate resulted in any kind of damaging issues. Nobody got hurt, nobody got in trouble.
The people that you counseled and just gave information to for harm reduction purposes was a substantial portion of the teams, would you say, or was it a minority, or was it more commonplace than people would assume?
Outside looking in,
mm-hmm.
I believe that it might have been more commonplace than people would have assumed 4 or 5 years ago. And I certainly think it was way more commonplace than the higher ups, the ones that are detached from the operational lifestyle, the policymakers and the brass and all that. Everybody that's ultimately responsible for the actions and whatever. It's way, way, way disproportionate to their view of the teams. But it doesn't necessarily accurately reflect any kind of pathology or dysfunction. It's just different than what they expected. And there's a lot of factors that can go into that, and a lot of things that can be ignored or can be acknowledged. It really changed the dynamic of this entire issue, and I think that's what the bread and butter of what we want to discuss for to help guys that are involved in it and maybe don't have an option out that they see, or maybe hopefully if they're open to the idea, give NSW some foresight on how to gain some semblance of control when they in the world where they perceive they've lost it.
Let me ask you this question: why do you think SEALs turn to controlled substances in their downtime, or even on deployment? It sounds like these guys in Iraq had a bar set up, and there are big questions about a whole discussion that could be made about whether alcohol is appropriate or not. And I'm sure you guys have rules on alcohol consumption during deployment, etc. Do you think that some of the symptoms or some of the cause could be that some of these guys feel special? Or because right now I can look at you on the sofa and I can see that you have a beard. And in the United States Navy, beards are not allowed. They used to be a long time ago. The military has grooming standards, but in the SEAL teams, you get to grow whatever facial hair you want. Because first of all, you can help.
They'd like to agree with that, but that's one of the more regular complaints. Why the fuck can't we have relaxed grooming standards? It's a menial gripe. I mean, life's pretty good. It is a menial gripe, yeah. Life must be pretty good.
Yeah, it is a bullshit gripe to have. But that starts that's across the line as far as the Navy's concerned is regarding grooming standards. You guys don't have to. I mean, it's one of the rules that you get to break, right? So
yeah. If you want to break down the whole problem with us separating ourselves from the collective, then it's just going to have to be agreed upon that having a very, very difficult selection with a very, very high attrition rate that's publicly glorified, that's derivative of a reputation, then yeah, you're gonna have people that are totally enveloped in the world that is the reputation that they embody. You're gonna have people that realize they stand on the shoulders of giants and love the fucking view.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you think that being, their thoughts of being special, or the segregation of Navy Special Warfare away from Navy regular could be feeding into their decisions of using controlled substances because they think they're above the rules or separated from the regular regulations? Is that
it's interesting that you bring that up, because this is something that people probably don't really contemplate. But if you look at the circumstances surrounding abusive relationships with substances and the causality behind that, and the aspirational benefit from escaping, why would it be logical that somebody who is taking pride in totally absolved from rules try to be escaping anything about that? If they're exercising a superiority complex, where's the pathology of needing to escape or maladaptive, or what? That would be an issue of
is it needing
undue
to
pride?
True. Yeah, but is it escaping, or is it simply?
See, that's why I don't think it's an escape thing, and I don't think it's a pride thing. A large number of these folks are more likely than not gravitating towards cathartic solutions to things they don't understand or are being neglected on a mass scale. When you look at the prevailing issues of guys returning from combative capacity overseas in these units, even guys that just went through BUDS, you're talking about blast exposures and in the nth degree. There's a lot of traumatic brain injury. There's guys with PTSD. There's guys with depression. There's guys with all sorts of issues that they're either knowing or unknowingly sorting out, and probably on terms that are not theirs. And rather than seeking the help that is available, assuming there's a good quantity of that, people are very tentative when they're looking for mental health.
Yeah. Now, do you think it's like a self-medication valve?
It could be, but it doesn't. It could be a self-medication thing at a really, really unforeseen level, because you look at the regular self-medication, you're talking about guys that drink too much because they don't, they want to numb themselves, or guys that smoke weed, or stuff like that to numb physical pain. So that's self-medication. A lot of people don't really understand TBI. A lot of people don't really understand treatment-resistant or atypical symptomatic PTSD and depression. So, not only do they not recognize it for what it is, but they may recognize it and be horrified of reaching out for help for the sake of being stigmatized as ill or unsalvageable or broken or whatever the case, losing their credibility as an operational person in that world.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of guys that are there's a lot of guys out there that are not getting help for things that they need help for. There's a lot of guys like myself who didn't even understand that there were symptoms of things that were, manifesting in ways I could never have imagined.
Right.
And then, and so a lot of the stuff is running unchecked and really kind of festering in the collective mind of the operators. And if you look at this bleeding edge medical research and clinical trials, and you take the things that are most prevalent in these communities, TBI, PTSD, depression, etc. look at the substances that they're using to heal those things with unprecedented success. They're using dopaminergic CNS stimulants, things like Adderall and Ritalin, to treat the residuals of TBI. Well, from a pharmacological perspective,
you get kicked out.
That's cocaine,
right? You get
it's a
you get kicked out of the military.
It's a methamphetamine. It's an amphetamine, and it's very, very slightly. It's a few iterations derivative of the chemical makeup of cocaine.
Right.
Right.
And not to mention, I mean, now they're finding a great deal of success in treating PTSD with MDMA, which people
ecstasy.
don't. Right, ecstasy.
One of the biggest problems they've had in military history, guys with emotional trauma are finding solace or comfort, whether intentionally or not, in chemically the most productive and unprecedented success of all pharmacological treatment in this entire realm of that issue.
Yeah.
Period. In history. Of course they are going to that. And it's funny because you're not looking at guys that are abusing these, guys aren't showing up to training fucking rolling on MDMA. And guys, like when guys are tired, they want to sleep. Guys aren't doing cocaine to fucking stay awake in their off time just so they can party, because when they go back to work, they got to stay awake for work.
Right.
That's insane.
Right.
They're doing it when they have downtime, and it's a seemingly cathartic solution with, according to the Navy, no realistic fallout because of the disciplinary lapse or whatever it is. I don't know, whatever they see as the issue. So, it's not, to me, it's not surprising that guys are using or abusing things like MDMA and cocaine and ketamine. Ketamine's a huge one. Ketamine's like probably one of the most profoundly effective mental health catalysts for like treatment and growth and stabilizing mental dysfunction, like cognitive dysfunction. It's probably one of the most profoundly effective chemicals in ever.
And to back that up, the science is proving that out, that ketamine assisted psychotherapy is excessively effective.
Yeah, ketamine, psilocybin, lysergic acid, and MDMA, all four in clinical trials right now with very, very almost unbelievable success rates, to the point where it's not like a point of arguing anymore. It's like, hey, somebody should pay attention to this.
Right.
These guys all have these issues across the board. These guys are seemingly all having these drug-related issues across the board. But nobody can figure out why it went unchecked for so long, because there wasn't seemingly any dysfunction across the board.
Do you think that that's one of the reasons that the Navy has kind of been... Because, I mean, the evidence is...
The Navy doesn't know. It's clear they don't, because the actions that they've tried to take to mitigate fallout from their perceived problems are indicative of somebody who's completely confused and caught off guard. Like, they're on their heels right now because they don't understand it. They're not looking at all the pieces, though. They have a pixelated view of the issue.
Agreed. Do you think that they've been wiping, kind of sweeping the dirt under the rug for a little while?
Wouldn't you?
Well, boy, that's a really good question regarding my personal stance.
Who wouldn't? If you were now, personal stance aside, if hypothetically, if you were the embodiment of effective operation, if you were reputed saviors, end all be all, the go-to solution, the most productive, effective, and whatever, statistically most functional fighting force in all human history, then why in the world would personal issues ever come up to the public?
I mean, it would come down to operational excellence and operational efficiency, right?
What could the public do to address that?
Not a lot. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it comes down to whether or not you can do your job, right? Which is how a lot of employers, period, look at, alcohol issues.
Or just any personal life things,
Right, yeah.
If it's a noticeable thing and it's causing a disruptive environment in the workplace, it gets addressed. Other than that, if everybody knows that John has a drinking problem and you can smell him at the water cooler, but nobody really gives a shit because dude's got the highest sales in the company, then nobody really gives a shit. And that guy's going to die of liver cancer or something, like way down the line. And nobody bats an eyelash.
Right.
Because it's not the company's problem.
So you think there's a part of the Navy that did that for a while?
No, I legitimately believe that the Navy had no idea whatsoever that their unit was even capable of such an egregious misstep.
Now, you say that from a top brass perspective, or
Of course, right? Because at an operational level, we all kind of know the ins and outs of our like non-ideal behavior, right?
Right.
our less than desirable actions.
Right. Because there's, there are folks who are in the mix of managing operational units who say, we're getting our job done. It's okay if my guys let off some pressure and some steam, and hey guys, wink, wink. It's going to be on the test. Yeah. There's a drug test coming up on Tuesday. Stupid. Don't do anything stupid this weekend.
It's not just that, but even in those leadership capacities and authoritative positions, those guys are experiencing the same thing. We're all on the same ride. So they're not impervious to the same factors that are leading to what the public is now seeing, with too much public insight into a community that's supposed to be not a public community.
So let me ask you this question. Is there a solution in the United States Navy's future that might include loosening the restrictions on, because right now it seems to be a 1 or a 0, a black or white issue. It is, you do not take any of these substances at any time, and there is no moderation. There is no, because
right.
Everybody says, nothing hurts in moderation. There is no potential for you to have any potential, positive benefit, even though science is showing that, these things can happen. These things can help you after the fact, after you leave military service. Go do LSD assisted therapy or ketamine assisted therapy or whatever it is that we're going to now allow for, the DEA and the FDA get together and they say, yeah, we're going to allow these substances to be used under doctor supervision, et cetera. We can't do that inside the military, though.
These things are a cunt hair away from being in your local pharmacy, so it needs to be addressed.
Yeah. So is there a solution in the future that allows the Navy to say, hey, maybe with doctor's supervision, we can start utilizing psilocybin or one of these other chemical compounds to relieve some of the stress or some of the issues that are building up and then are cause for separation later and ongoing cost and services and things like that as we move well into life after military service.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, and this is, 100% my opinion, but as far as I can tell, with my experience in that whole world, I think that honestly, the only solution that's gonna give them flexibility in their public view and help maintain some semblance of credibility or capacity to be an austere unit, while also addressing what they consider systemic dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only way to do that is to take a huge step back, look at all of the implicating factors, make sure that these guys that are popping for drug abuse aren't the same guys that are experiencing these textbook mental health issues community-wide, and make sure that they are abusing disproportionate to health relationship with these substances. Make sure that it is an abusive thing, and then not like momentary lapses of judgment. And then and if that is the case, and they just see holes in their redundant safety measures to prevent the screening, the urinalysis whatsoever, all that yada yada. If there is just isolated discipline issues, that they need to understand the dysfunction in their system, which we can go into detail because it's very easy to outline, and it's worth knowing if they want to correct it, because they don't understand it and it's not going to get corrected with their perspective right now.
So let me ask you this question. Did they provide those types of substances while on particular operations in the field?
The military is not against providing the nootropic non-amphetamine solution to the energy problem, which is usually something in the realm of like Provigil, New Vigil.
Yeah.
And it recently, while ADHD and ADD have become pretty popular in the whole population, they've kind of come around to providing you prescriptions to stuff like that. I mean, I got a prescription Adderall after I failed a drug test for it, so they're not opposed to it.
So they don't think that having it in your system reduces your operational capability.
So clearly, it doesn't diminish your capacity to be operational. Otherwise, they wouldn't prescribe it.
Right.
So we're not talking about putting the force at risk. We're talking about figuring out why these guys are going to cocaine instead of going to their mental health specialist.
Right.
And I'll tell you why. Because every time somebody goes and asks for help, everybody looks at them like they got a big old dick growing out of their face, and they get pulled out of their operational capacity, or at least they think this. And everybody wants to coddle them, and there's just so much of a stigma behind mental health lapses.
Yeah, because from the military perspective, speaking as a veteran myself with history in the Navy, no one wants to go on limited duty to say, you're not fit for full duty. There's a stigma attached with.
Why would you go through, especially in the SEAL teams, why would you go through all that training? Why would you go through all that selection and all this, that, and the other, and all the hazing, which is awesome, by the way. That's another topic. Why would you go through all that stuff and then sit behind a computer?
Yeah.
That's stupid.
Yeah.
That's a stupid thing to contemplate. Of course they don't want to be limited duty. Of course they don't want to sit in the office and explain to some, honestly, and I don't have a race issue, or I don't have a gender issue, I don't have any kind of bigotry or any hang-ups like that, but you're talking about the NSW mental health specialist being this middle-aged lady.
Right.
You're talking about a middle-aged lady is sitting here assessing the capacity to be a sane individual for a 20-nothing, or maybe perhaps a teenage male,
right,
who's operating at such an elevated combative capacity that it's legitimately unprecedented in human history. And that lady's going to sort it out. And that lady is alone, solely responsible for the mental health of all of Group 2. Of course, we're not going to go talk to her. It's not cool to be fucked up because you can't do your job.
Right.
All of the rules are designed for you to fail. You're even actually guilty until proven innocent in the military.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. I'm not going to listen to anything y'all say or tell you anything about what's going on because I don't know how to support myself or defend myself.
Right.
Of course you guys don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
You guys have put yourself in that so overbearingly authoritative position that you'll never know.
Hey guys, more with ex-Navy SEAL Ben Johnson in just a moment. We hope you're enjoying the interview. We got a lot more to come. But first, one of the reasons that we got together as a team to do this podcast in the first place is that these guys were Navy SEALs and they discovered this book, Mind Hacking Happiness, which, having already gone through the best mind training that the United States government has to provide, these guys are calling this the best mind training manual on the planet, or at least one of them, and if not the best mind training manual for you to take control of your mind and emotions and things like that. For those of you who are interested in this episode in particular, the content that we're talking about here, if you have some skin in the game, let's say, then you may want to check this book out, because this is one of the only manuals that will allow people to be empowered within themselves without having the stigma of going to a shrink or something like that, to take control of the most powerful tool that they have on the planet to execute being a good soldier and being a good human after the fact. This book allows people to take control of their minds in a very proactive way, allowing them to feel empowered, allowing them to feel a sense of accomplishment, and it changes your life forever when you understand the basics of how your mind works and how you can change the variables within your mind to change the entire output of your mind. You can reduce suicides in the military. You can reduce domestic violence issues. You can reduce anger issues. You can reduce all sorts of issues and problems that the military is facing or that even regular day folks are facing. I mean, there are people who have cured their addictions because of just reading this book. And this book isn't about addictions. This book isn't for veterans. It's for human beings who want to understand how their mind works so that they can take control of it. All it takes is just a little bit of knowledge for how your mind works to be able to take control of your mind and take control of your entire life, including in our military service members and our first responders and people in stressful situations where they need to be dealing with that stress on a moment-to-moment basis so that it doesn't pile up and turn into things like domestic violence or substance abuse problems, etc. And if you want to find out what's in this book, just pick it up. It's on Amazon. It's on Audible. You can get a free version of it if you go to our website, twosealsandwalrus.com/free book, and pick that up if you don't have an Audible subscription. Check it out. Anyway, hope this message finds you well. Now back to the show. So let me ask you this question. There have been a lot of headlines in the news recently regarding SEALs, with, I guess, killing people at the wrong time for the wrong reasons, or connections with domestic abuse, or connections with interactions with law enforcement, which I know if I've seen headlines with connections with law enforcement that there are a lot more of those that exist, because law enforcement, at least when they find out you're a SEAL, I mean, you could probably not get pulled over for anything short or maybe including potential DUI and roll away when they figure out that you're ex-Special Forces, because...
well, funny you mentioned that. If we're ready for anecdotal stuff.
No, hold on. Let's put that...
we'll get to the anecdotal stuff. But
let's put that aside, because I have a serious question.
Yeah.
All right, so I know that the SEALs have been in the headlines for various purposes.
Right.
But all of those purposes are connected with mental mistakes caused by potential emotional outbursts or emotional reactions that they could learn to control if they had a different perspective on things or additional insight, or if you want to do a book plug, if you want to read about your mind, right? Mind hacking happiness. Like if they were able to use that meta awareness to a point that they could see their mind and see their emotional reactions and understand what to do with that stuff, or if they were able to cross the line into a regulated use of psychedelics. Like, weren't you talking to me about?
Yeah, that would be an incredible step towards comprehensive health that I don't, as hopeful as I am, it's worth discussing, because you're right, there are so many headlines where it just seems like these guys are kind of just saying fuck it,
Yeah.
almost like they're at the point of exhaustion or frustration, or just completely tapped out on resources. I don't know. I don't presume to be in the mind of the operational SEAL at this time and place. But what it looks like based on what's being reported, which
You never know what's, yeah.
whatever. But what it looks like and what the commands are complaining about, it looks like it could be addressed with one fell swoop, assuming they're flexible and open-minded enough to acknowledge the underlying causes and cure it, as opposed to treating symptoms. I'll go ahead and just outline my approach. So, anybody at NSW or anybody who cares enough to pass it on, feel free, and then if you like it, contact us. I'll be glad to sit down and hash it out. But I thought about it a lot, and I think the most productive, least costly, and most permissive solution to this would be to lax the regulations on the therapeutic use of serotonergic psychedelic assisted therapy, implement that into the mental health regimen and carefully monitor and regulate the process that guys go through while they address big ticket items on the mental health roster.
Right.
And watch as those, not only do those things tend to just dissolve into nothingness, but the other effects that will pretty much accompany any psychedelic use in a therapeutic fashion are just they're so almost tailored to these specific issues that it's astounding. I mean, you're talking about guys that are seemingly prone to unnecessary bouts of violence. Not that they're violent people, but that when it's almost seemingly inappropriate, completely with no excuse,
right,
we're seeing an influx in bouts of violence in those scenarios. Well, if you look at the FBI reports on crime, on household crime, violent crime, etc., statistically, people who have used or who regularly use in a therapeutic fashion any of the serotonergic psychedelics as healing components, they are, somewhere in the mid-30s, almost 40% less likely to engage in any kind of spousal abuse, domestic violence, or any kind of like unprovoked or unnecessary violent outbursts. People just don't want to be violent. People that use these substances for healing purposes and in healthy therapeutic fashion, they're not violent folks. That even in the criminal world where it's illegal to buy, sell, trade, etc., or use, even in the recreational fashion, what you could maybe consider some of the use abusive, those folks are still so far from the radar in a violent crime world that it's worth noting. It's worth noting the correlation between the use of these psychedelics that are not harmful to the body. As a matter of fact, scientifically proven to be the opposite.
Right.
And they're keeping people from being unnecessarily violent, out of character.
So let me ask you this. So with the United States Navy having to dance that fine line of wanting an excessively violent force,
they're dancing
deployment.
a fine line because they made fine lines.
Okay.
Stop drawing lines, if they want a force that's capable of excessive violence but shows unprecedented restraint, they need a force that's mentally healthy enough that is a valid option. And if you're talking about guys that are having profoundly neglected mental health status almost across the board, even well into after they get out, what? I mean, not to be rude, but what do you expect?
Right.
So, I think a cursory once over of the general well-being mentally of the community, and really paying attention to the underlying symptoms of mental health dysfunction. Mm-hmm. Will give you a huge illuminating path towards the actual cause. Right. Instead of jumping to conclusions about ethical lapses and leadership and stuff, and like, it's just not that bad. These guys are effective. These guys are impressive on so many accounts, and by most standards and in most scenarios, they are beyond reproach. That's a point of pride, and it's something that they've taken very, very careful care to exercise and maintain. So I think it's almost detrimental for the Navy to kick back a public statement like, we have systemic dysfunction. We don't have systemic dysfunction. We have very, very predictable, treatable, manageable symptoms of issues that are not surprising.
Yeah, because one of the things that surprised me, or that struck me, that is being pushed forward by my memory into my conscious awareness, is Doug sitting there on the end of the couch when we had a similar conversation And he was saying, look, these guys are human beings. And to expect them to be superhuman is unrealistic.
Especially confined within human behavior parameters of acceptable behavior.
Right. Because frankly speaking, Navy SEALs are asked to do things that other people do not have the capacity to do, and that is not normal behavior in a human being's life. And then they're supposed to be regular human beings after being asked to do that and trained to do that on a regular basis, with no leeway for...
Yeah, I think, the issue isn't necessarily that they're asked to be capable of this and then expected to be, adhering to these regulations. It's the fact that those standards and those parameters are very, very open and public and agreed upon on both parties, both the operator and the people implementing those. But nobody's talking about whose job it is to give accurate assessments of the mental health. These guys don't know what to look for, and what the reality of it is. It's turning out that most of these issues are atypical symptomatic, and they're not expressing themselves openly. They're not affected in these people in a way that most professionals are even capable of sitting down and assessing accurately. So when you got guys that want to stay operational and don't want to be labeled as sick or fucked up,
right,
and then you got a mental health professional who's potentially looking at things in a different manner than they've ever been seen in the history of humankind, and you got the oversight, knee-jerk defaulting to systemic failure to maintain discipline and order, then you're running into an issue where you're just putting Band-Aids on bullet holes. It's never going to stop if you're doing that. You're trying to figure out what's wrong with the urinalysis test? Come on, guys.
Yeah.
What's wrong with the urinalysis test is the fact that you can go to any lawyer that's got more than just air between your ears and pay them $800 to prove that somewhere down the line of possession of that sample that somebody didn't keep eye contact on it 100% of the time. Like somebody spun around in their office chair just long enough that boom, technically failure to adhere to the standards.
Right.
It's such an easy cop out.
Yeah,
anybody could.
The chain of evidence, and basically you're just getting a lawyer to, and that's
the chain of custody of that sample has to be so meticulously watched all the way to the lab that you're almost guaranteed an out if you just don't say a word, take court martial, pay a lawyer $800 and have them investigate the chain of possession of that sample all the way down.
Yeah.
Somebody who got lazy and took a piss. Somebody asked their buddy who's not a certified handler of the specimen to watch it while they went to their car. Somebody took their eyes off of it long enough to check an email or look at a meme or check their Facebook or some shit. There's something. They're almost 100% guaranteed. So that's the issue. That's why urinalysis never worked. Don't worry about fake pee or bottle or whatever, watching it come out of the pee hole, or the fact that it's been such a joke for such a long time.
Yeah.
There you go, guys. That you want to worry about the urinalysis, worry about the fact that the system's so heavily regulated that you're a victim of your own regulations.
Yeah. And that, the alternate solution might be, relax the restrictions around use of these substances.
Well, maybe not relax the restrictions around abuse.
No, yeah, you certainly don't want to have problems with
Right.
abuse. I mean, when you, everything's okay in moderation, right? You don't want to go beyond moderation, right? You don't want to have the extreme abuse of destructive, opioids or whatever. You're going to have a major issue.
Man, I was on
so
many times. I was on Dilaudid drips or all this, that, and the other, nerve damage, and my spinal injuries and the holes in my intestines and stuff. I can't tell you. I've been on enough opioids to kill a fucking continent. It's a miracle I don't have an addiction problem. But I don't have an addiction problem because I'm not. I don't have an addictive type personality,
right?
And because I use psychedelics,
right?
Because
psychedelics.
Because guess what? Statistically, also according to FBI statistics on drug related crime, people who use experimentally or regularly use psychedelics almost across the board, like almost 100% unanimously, do not use other illicit drugs.
Right.
They usually don't even experiment with other illicit drugs.
Right. Well, that bears out with the data that, like for instance, I know of a number of anecdotal stories where people with just life-crushing addiction
Crippling
problems,
addiction, decades of opioid or benzo or anything,
where
alcohol.
they take one trip down into the jungle or Mexico or whatever and experience iboga therapy.
One night.
Yeah, one night, it's friggin' cured.
One night in a maloka in the jungle with the shaman. One night with a witch doctor in Africa. One night with a homeboy with some mushrooms, and it just take 4 hours out of your life, and you're talking about curing decades of pathology.
Which, by the way, they're forced to do down in those jungles or in the foreign nation because of the controls that are posed here by, first of all, the DEA, the FDA, and military regulation to say you can't try that stuff. You can't do it. You can't use it as a medicine.
Right.
You can't use it as a therapy. You can't do it any which way, 7 ways to Sunday.
It's just straight up illegal. Get over it.
Right.
Right. Okay. Well, as nice as the progressive approach that we have in a secular world is, or the research and clinical trials and everything is, if the government wants to maintain positive control of a cutting edge fighting force, they're going to have to maintain positive control of that fighting force's well-being.
Now let's talk about this issue for a second, because one of the things that also our third partner, who's not here today, brought up was the fact that when Dr. Jeffrey Martin asked him, and both you guys, about whether or not psychedelic use would be beneficial to SEAL teams, he said it would help overall. He said there would be more washouts, and because both of you guys said that you weren't sure whether you had entered military service had you had the experiences that you have now since gathered afterwards, but you could not have said, I would not enter military service because that led me to where I am today, which is a higher level of understanding, etc., and yada yada yada. And Doug's position was it will wash more people out, or help people select that they're not operator material, but at the same time you'll wind up with better operators in the end because they'll be more grounded, they'll be more balanced, they'll be able to make better decisions in highly stressful situations, in emotionally charged situations, and have better control of their cognition during those moments of stress. And I thought that was very telling that, first of all, you've got a military who's probably pretty nervous about psychedelics, in the fact that, if you take something that helps you see everyone else as your brother, then you will be less likely to want to pull the trigger when you need to pull the trigger, supposedly, theoretically speaking.
That's what it should be anyway.
And I kind of agree. I kind of agree that, just from a personal standpoint, that the fewer people you kill, the fewer enemies you're going to make with their family members and things like that. Because, you want to create terrorists, explode a bomb at some point where there's collateral damage of, children dying or women dying that are in a family, and all of a sudden, people who weren't radicalized previously are now very radicalized and say, fuck you. Like, you come after my family, like, I could be out of the fight. You come after my family and you do some harm to my son, oh, you're opening up a world of hurt.
Right.
I'm the most peaceful person, or one of the most peaceful people on the planet internally, but you come after my son.
That's to be expected, and that doesn't change. That doesn't have to be something that changes. So these things aren't going into your brain and rewiring you to be a fundamentally completely different human being than you were. And what we're getting into with this discussion, like this particular path, this tangent, is a little bit dangerous territory, because we're talking about the benefits of a productive application of psychedelic use in the SEAL team community. We're not talking about specifically where. Now, if you talk about it at the end of, or from that point on further in the career only, from selection, and, Doug's right. You're gonna run into a lot of people that got to the end of selection and are finding themselves looking for doors out.
Right.
However, if you look at one of their biggest issues they've had from the get-go, and one of the coolest things about these particular class of substance, if you start with appropriate, monitored, and therapeutic application of these substances prior to and maintained during selection,
Yeah.
you'll start to notice that it's very, very, very helpful in illuminating the characteristics of those that the ethos literally outlines. So, Psychology Today they published a study, and the language of the study's got to be carefully gone over because it can be misconstrued a lot of ways, as statistics can. But basically, there's a really strong positive correlation between children with above average intellectual capacity or intelligence quotient scores and the prevalence of psychedelic drug use in early and late adulthood. And it's a very, very, very strong, it's a creepy, almost undeniable proof to some degree. Most people that are of above average intellectual capacity, now I want to be clear, above average intellectual capacity does not mean that these people are all making smart decisions.
True.
That has to be understood. I am not, by any stretch of the imagination, trying to sit here and tell everybody on the planet that people who use drugs like psychedelics make better decisions and are smarter than everybody. I'm simply stating an observation that Psychology Today thought important enough to publish,
Right.
that illustrates a correlation between above average intellectual capacity and the prevalence of psychedelic drug use in the future. Also, that same study notes the lack of drug usage in other categories of drugs, all other illicit drug substances.
Yeah. Now, I think one of the things that maybe needs to be brought into the conversation is that you have people in the SEAL community who have wound up in the headlines because of self-destructive urges with things not going their way, and then they commit suicide and or taking out their aggressions on other people, etc. And
it's sad.
Yeah, it is. And it would seem to me that maybe some type of therapy-assisted psychedelic use would dramatically decrease those types of headlines and problems. I mean, headlines are basically just an indication of a problem,
right?
And deviant behavior that the Navy doesn't want to see in their elite operators, which can be challenging for operational readiness as well.
So let me just be clear. What you're trying to say is that if we were carefully monitoring and dosing guys with the most effective treatment for depression and PTSD in known history, with immediate and permanent effects after a single treatment, that guys might stop killing each other and themselves.
Call me crazy.
Strange. That's dangerous thinking there, Sean. Well, you best keep to your numbers.
Well, it goes to that argument that says, it can't be a 1 or a 0. You can't.
It's like, wake the fuck up. I mean, I hate to be like that coarse about it. I don't want to be curt in my suggestions, but it needs to be acknowledged. You guys need to understand that these things, you guys want to spend bazillions of dollars trying to figure out what the X factor is, or guys make it in a community where the ethos says innovative and creative thinkers, the characters beyond reproach. You need healthy intellectual people. If you need healthy intellectual people, dose them with psilocybin and see what happens. If they're not capable of maintaining or growing or anything productive probably not a viable candidate for special operations. If they are, and they continue that path of monitored mental health assessments and regulated, very, very therapeutic and a systematic approach to dosing them with these substances throughout their career, you're looking at a level of neurogenesis that completely diminishes all symptoms of mental health associated with concussive traumatic brain injury stuff.
Yeah.
You're looking at a collective amount of unifying sensation and personal intrinsic value gained from these experiential effects that preclude the necessity for violent outbursts. So you're seeing a profound drop in any undesirable violent behavior. You're looking at an almost insane level of reduction in actual illicit drug abuse. And you're looking at guys that are unbelievably savvy and stable and able to maintain. I mean, we haven't done the work yet. We haven't looked at it yet, but potentially indefinitely, as long as they want to.
Yeah, and the other thing that I would see it as a potential benefit would be the increase in emotional intelligence, what the Navy long ago identified as one of the critical.
Emotional intelligence is critical for everybody. You don't have to be a SEAL to figure that out.
No.
You don't have to be a SEAL with problems to figure out that it's a problem is not there.
Right. Well, the Harvard Business Review, their On Point magazine, they put it on the cover. Emotional intelligence is the essential ingredient to success. And the Navy identified where, first of all, before we just gloss over this, emotional intelligence is twice as important as being intelligent and knowing your job. You succeed twice as much as just being intelligent and knowing your job if you have emotional intelligence. But the Navy particularly identified emotional intelligence as one of the critical skills for leadership. And emotional intelligence then also plays into making correct decisions regarding how to handle situations with other human beings and what's going on in their head,
Right.
what's going on in your head, what's going on in your head that you might not be able to control at the moment.
Human beings both on your side and not.
Right. And so psychedelics, one of the side effects or one of the primary effects,
One of the desirable effects.
yeah, is that you increase your emotional intelligence as a result because you get to meet the subconscious layer of your psyche that creates your emotional output in the first place. And thus you understand it much better and thus can manage those signals much better.
They've also found that these therapeutic applications, especially of psilocybin, in group settings, actually enhances the unity and the collectiveness and increases the efficacy of what people consider now, because of a very famous book, the flow state.
Yes.
You guys got guys operating in teams, maybe with people that they don't necessarily respect or want to be around or like much. But if you're going to go and throw into the public's face how amazing this community is because they've achieved some pseudo control over these mechanisms that induce flow state.
Yeah.
Guess what? Guess what really, really, really fucking induces flow state?
Yeah.
You want a good team?
The reduction of
Do
self.
the one thing that makes a team undeniable, no matter what they think about each other.
The reduction of self would certainly be one of those primary components, I would think.
It's paramount.
Yeah. Wow. This has been an amazing conversation today.
So stop thinking about your urinalysis being a joke, because it's going to be that way until you change the laws.
Right.
And if you're going to change the laws, thinking about changing the ones that matter.
Right.
Change the ones that are giving you guys even the option of doing negative headlines. You know what happens if you take that zero tolerance policy, throw it in the fucking shitter, and start giving people psilocybin and watching what happens, and developing your community around intellectually capable, emotionally intelligent, very, very, very ambitious and willing operators? You don't have any headlines. Because the only drug they're doing, they're allowed to. They're encouraged to.
Yeah.
Under supervision in a therapeutic fashion. You don't have operators coming back from decades of combat with brain damage because their brain's healing itself on the fly as you monitor and and regulate these doses. You don't have guys coming back with PTSD at all, because between the effective application of ketamine, modern combat triage in the field, and in tandem with something like a therapeutic psilocybin experience, guys will have the capacity to compartmentalize, cope, and move past all traumatic experiences. I mean, statistically, all of it across the board, instantaneously.
Right.
So no trauma, no brain damage, no violence, no drug use, and no legal action that needs to be taken. So there isn't headlines. There's no more headlines. Take away your own headline.
And a heck of a lot fewer headlines regarding or problems or issues or discipline regarding cocaine use, which has been in the headlines, right? I mean, because
cocaine use is not surprising. Adderall and methylphenidate, amphetamine salts, methylphenidate are very, very, very effective treatments of the residual effects of pretty bad TBI. So if you got guys that don't have the brain damage associated with TBI because of the neurogenesis from the psilocybin, then they don't have the desire to use these substances that actually legitimately treat them.
Yeah.
And unprecedented success. And not just that, but they don't have the desire to use them in any fashion, because people that use psychedelics don't use other illicit drugs.
So it seems to me, just from a logical perspective, from a 50,000-foot view perspective, looking in, that maybe something that should be taken into consideration should be changing the policy.
Yeah, let's look. You guys said statement from the big guy in charge or whatever. His statement was, "We're going to find the underlying cause." We just told you what the underlying cause is, straight from the horse's mouth. I lived it,
yeah,
and I'm healthy and happy, and I'm more than willing to sit down with anybody who's ready to listen and hash out a reasonable approach to letting these guys enjoy the job they work so hard to achieve, and do so in a manner that makes it what the teams is supposed to be to the public, which is character beyond reproach.
You know, and I don't think there's any portion of that is tongue in cheek, because you're one of the only people that can speak candidly without any fear of retribution, against you, or
maybe they take my benefits away, but that's just money.
Right.
If I don't make VA disability for the rest of my life, but everybody I ever cared about for a third of my fucking existence gets to continue to do their jobs effectively in a manner that's healthier and have happier families and do less harm to themselves and others, then fucking, you know what? Come take my VA benefits, rewrite my discharge, do what you will.
Right.
Let's talk. If anybody's ready to listen, let's have at it.
Yeah, because that would be an overall positive benefit.
It trumps anything that I have to lose.
Yeah. Wow.
To a degree that's not measurable.
Well, this has been an amazing discussion today. Ben Johnson, I really appreciate your candor in being able to sit and talk about these issues, having lived through them first person in such an open and honest way. And I think, there's a ton of honor being connected with, being on a SEAL team and being operationally ready and, doing what's asked of you, et cetera. But I think there's a equal amount of honor associated with what you're doing here today, to sit down and have this conversation, to say, here's what I experienced, here's what's going on inside the SEAL teams, here's the underlying issue that I see or that I've identified that maybe other people haven't yet identified, and maybe, a possible solution that you might want to put on your whiteboard could be considering XYZ, which today is going to be inclusive of, potentially exploring the therapeutic use of psychedelic, or loosening restrictions on that type of, chemical intervention that could assist everyone with all of these issues that they seem to have.
Right. It's not even that it can. It's that it's proven that it does.
Yeah.
Across the board.
I think we've done an amazing show today.
I hope so, man. We'll see. Only time will tell. There'll be a lot of folks out there that are a little bit butthurt about the fact that Ben Johnson's over here living large, and there's a bunch of team guys that aren't allowed to enjoy their fucking lives that they worked so hard to achieve. You know?
Yeah, I can't wait to see I can't wait to see the comments on YouTube and other places.
Take it easy on me, guys. I'm sensitive. You know.
Hey, well, thanks for joining us today. If you want to support this podcast, go to patreon.com/TSAW, 2 seals and a walrus. Usually we have 2 seals in studio today, but today was just Ben Johnson talking about his experience with controlled substances inside the SEAL teams and the reality that exists in that it's not just an isolated few guys. And maybe the Navy should look at things a little differently in that, use the science, use it to your benefit, etc. So, Ben, thank you for that today.
Absolutely.
All right. You guys have a great remainder of your day. Talk to you soon. Peace.
Share this shit.